On what should have been the happiest day of her life, Zara found herself fighting for survival against the very people she thought would become her family. Tables crashing, crystal glasses shattering against marble walls, grown adults throwing punches in $1,000 suits. By the end of that night, no one in that church would ever forget what happened. But the question is, what could drive a bride to beat the groom's entire family on her wedding day? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Meet Zara Johnson, a 28-year-old social worker from Detroit who believed love could conquer anything, and Malik Washington, a 31-year-old investment banker from one of Atlanta's most prominent black families, the kind with generational wealth and even bigger expectations. Two worlds that should have blended beautifully, but instead would collide with devastating consequences. 3 questions haunted everyone who witnessed that day. Why did this wedding descend into chaos? What secret was Malik hiding from the woman he claimed to love? And what shocking truth made Zara snap in front of 200 guests? Zara Johnson grew up with her grandmother in Detroit after her mother died when she was 12. Raised in a small apartment above a corner store, she learned early that respect was earned, not given. By day, she counseled at-risk youth at the community center. By night, she studied for her master's degree in social work. Zara was the kind of woman who fought for the underdog, who never backed down when she believed she was right. When she met Malik at a charity gala in downtown Atlanta, it felt like destiny. He was tall, handsome, spoke 3 languages, and seemed genuinely interested in her work with troubled kids. For 6 months, they were inseparable. He'd fly her to Miami for weekends, surprise her with flowers at work, and talk for hours about changing the world together. But Malik Washington came from a different universe. The Washington family had built their fortune in real estate over 3 generations. They owned half of Buckhead, sat on hospital boards, and had photographs with senators hanging in their mansion. Malik's mother, Vivien Washington, had been featured on the cover of Atlanta magazine as one of the city's most influential women. His father, Charles, was a federal judge. This was Southern black aristocracy at its finest. The first warning sign came at Easter dinner. Zara wore her best dress, a simple black number from Target that she'd saved up to buy. Vivien Washington greeted her with a smile that never reached her eyes, and spent the evening asking pointed questions about Zara's background. Where exactly did her people come from? What did her father do for work? Had she ever been to Martha's Vineyard for the summer? Zara's grandmother had taught her to be proud of who she was, but sitting at that dinner table surrounded by oil paintings of Washington ancestors, she felt small for the first time in years. Malik's younger sister, Simone, whispered jokes about Zara's Detroit accent. His cousin Trevor made comments about how refreshing it was to see Malik dating someone so authentic. But Malik seemed oblivious to the undercurrents. When Zara tried to tell him how his family made her feel, he brushed off her concerns. "They just need time to get to know you, baby. You're overthinking this." He was so used to his family's approval that he couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. The engagement came after a year of dating. Malik proposed during a family vacation in the Hamptons. Of course, the entire Washington clan was there to witness it. The ring was a 4-carat diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. Beautiful, but it came with strings attached. Strings that Zara was only beginning to understand. Wedding planning became a battlefield disguised as celebration. Vivien Washington took control immediately, booking the most exclusive venue in Atlanta, hiring the best wedding planner money could buy, and designing a guest list that read like a who's who of Black Atlanta society. When Zara suggested inviting some of her friends from the community center, Vivien wrinkled her nose and said, "Darling, we want this to be elegant." Every decision became a fight. Zara wanted her favorite gospel singer from her grandmother's church to perform. Vivien hired a classical quartet instead. Zara chose a simple wedding dress that made her feel beautiful. Vivien insisted she needed something more appropriate for the Washington family name. and dragged her to a boutique where dresses cost more than Zara made in 6 months. The final straw came during dress shopping. While Zara was trying on gowns, she overheard Vivien on the phone with someone speaking in hushed tones about damage control and how they needed to manage this situation before it got out of hand. When Zara confronted her about it, Vivien's mask slipped for just a moment, and she said something that would haunt Zara for weeks. Some people need to remember their place. But Malik continued to dismiss Zara's concerns. He was caught between two worlds, his family's expectations and his love for a woman who represented everything they feared: change, independence, someone who couldn't be controlled or bought. Instead of standing up to his family, he chose the path of least resistance: denial. 2 weeks before the wedding, Zara discovered something that changed everything. While helping Malik move some boxes from his childhood room, she found a folder filled with private investigator reports. Reports about her financial history, her mother's medical records, even interviews with neighbors from her old apartment building. The Washington family had been investigating her for months, looking for ammunition to use against her. When she confronted Malik, he broke down. His family had hired the PI after the engagement, claiming they needed to protect the family reputation. They'd found nothing scandalous, Zara's record was spotless, but they'd been building a case anyway. Her mother's struggle with addiction before she died, her father's absence from her life, her grandmother's bankruptcy 15 years earlier. They were planning to use all of it to prove she wasn't worthy of the Washington name. "I was going to tell you," Malik said, tears in his eyes. "I was going to stop them. I just needed more time." But time had run out, and Zara felt betrayed by the one person who was supposed to protect her. June 15th arrived with perfect weather. Ebenezer Baptist Church, the same church where Dr. King had preached, was decorated with white roses and flowing silk. 200 guests filled the pews, from city council members to federal judges to Fortune 500 CEOs. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a social event that would be talked about for years. Zara walked down the aisle in a gown that cost more than her grandmother's car, wearing a smile that hid the turmoil in her heart. She decided to go through with the ceremony, hoping that once they were married, the family dynamics would change. She was wrong. The ceremony proceeded without incident. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed, and for a moment, looking into Malik's eyes, Zara remembered why she'd fallen in love with him. But during the reception, as guests mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, Vivien Washington prepared to execute her plan. If you're still watching, type "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's riding through this story. The reception was held at the historic Swan House, with its elegant gardens and marble terraces. Everything was perfect, too perfect, the kind of perfection that felt suffocating. Zara moved through the crowd, smiling and accepting congratulations, but she could. During dinner, as guests enjoyed their 7-course meal, Vivien Washington rose to give what everyone expected to be a traditional mother of the groom speech. She spoke about family legacy, about the importance of choosing partners who understood our values, about the responsibility that came with the Washington name. Then she said the words that would change everything. "Some of you may not know that our new daughter-in-law's family has quite an interesting history," Vivien began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Her mother, rest her soul, struggled with some personal demons that ultimately led to her untimely death, and Zara herself was raised by her grandmother after being abandoned by her father. We believe in redemption in this family, which is why we're welcoming her despite her challenging background. The room fell silent. 200 guests sat frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, as Vivien Washington destroyed Zara's dignity in front of Atlanta's elite. But she wasn't finished. "Of course, we had to do our due diligence to protect our family," Vivien continued. "The private investigator's report was quite thorough. Did you know that Zara's grandmother filed for bankruptcy, or that her mother was arrested twice for drug possession before she died? These are the kinds of details that matter when you're joining a family with our standing in the community." Malik sat frozen beside Zara, his face pale with shock. He'd known about his mother's plan but hadn't believed she would actually go through with it. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. When Zara looked at him, waiting for him to defend her, to stand up and tell his mother to stop, he said nothing. He just sat there, paralyzed by a lifetime of trying to please parents who could never be pleased. That silence was the match that lit the fire. Zara stood up slowly, her wedding dress rustling like thunder in the quiet room. When she spoke, her voice carried across the terrace with the authority of someone who had spent years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. "My mother was sick," Zara said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "She struggled with addiction because she was in pain, not because she was weak. My grandmother filed for bankruptcy because she spent her life savings taking care of a sick daughter and raising a granddaughter alone. And my father, he left because he was a coward, not because there was something wrong with me." She turned to face Vivien directly. "But you know what I learned growing up? I learned that money can't buy class. I learned that a mansion doesn't make you a home. And I learned that sometimes the people who look down on others are the ones who should be looking in the mirror." The room was electric with tension. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Simone, Malik's sister, muttered something about knowing her place, and that's when Zara's composure finally cracked. "My place?" Zara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me tell you about my place. My place is standing up for kids who get told they're not good enough because of where they come from. My place is fighting for families who get looked down on by people like you. My place is not sitting here and letting you destroy my mother's memory to make yourself feel superior." Trevor, Malik's cousin, stood up and pointed at Zara. "You need to calm down and remember who you're talking to." That's when 28 years of standing up to bullies took over. Zara picked up her champagne glass and threw it directly at Trevor's face. Chaos erupted. Trevor lunged toward Zara, but she was ready. Years of self-defense classes and a lifetime of fighting for survival kicked in. She grabbed a dinner plate and smashed it over his head before he could reach her. Crystal glasses began flying as other family members rushed to Trevor's aid. Malik finally moved, but instead of protecting his wife, he tried to restrain her. "Let me go!" Zara screamed, breaking free from Malik's grip. "You sat there and let her humiliate me! You let her destroy my family's name in front of everyone!" She shoved him so hard he fell backward into the dessert table, sending the 5-tier wedding cake crashing to the ground. Vivien Washington screamed for security, but Zara wasn't finished. She grabbed the microphone from the bandstand and her voice boomed across the terrace. "You want to know the truth about backgrounds? Let me tell you about this family. They hired private investigators to dig up dirt on me because they were terrified their precious son was marrying beneath them. They spent months planning to humiliate me on my wedding day because they thought I wasn't good enough for their precious name." Simone tried to grab the microphone from Zara, and that's when the real fight began. Zara had grown up scrapping with kids twice her size. She was outnumbered but not outmatched. She fought like her life depended on it, because in a way, it did. This was about more than a wedding. This was about respect, dignity, and refusing to be made small by people who thought money made them better than everyone else. Tables overturned as the brawl spread. Guests in $1,000 outfits threw punches in the garden where Atlanta's elite had celebrated for decades. The sound of shattering crystal mixed with screams and curses as years of hidden resentments exploded into violence. By the time security arrived, Zara had left her mark on half the Washington family. Trevor had a black eye and a broken nose. Simone was missing chunks of her perfectly styled hair. Even Charles Washington, the distinguished federal judge, was nursing a bruised ego after Zara had called him out for enabling his wife's toxic behavior. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but by then the damage was done. The most anticipated wedding of the Atlanta social season had become a battlefield. Photos and videos were already spreading on social media. The Washington family's reputation, built over 3 generations, was in ruins. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. While everyone expected Zara to be devastated, humiliated, destroyed by the chaos she'd caused, something different happened. As she stood in her torn wedding dress, makeup smeared, holding a broken champagne bottle, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: free. The investigating officers found conflicting testimonies. The Washingtons claimed Zara had attacked them unprovoked, but several guests, including some who had witnessed Vivien's speech, told a different story. They described a young woman who had been publicly humiliated and then defended herself when attacked. No charges were filed that night, but the real consequences were just beginning. Within hours, the story had exploded across social media. Videos of the fight were shared thousands of times. The hashtag Judge Zara Fought began trending as people debated whether she was a hero or a villain. The comments were split down the middle. Some called her behavior unacceptable, saying she should have handled the situation with more dignity. Others praised her for standing up to a family that had tried to destroy her. But the most interesting reactions came from people who knew what it felt like to be dismissed, looked down upon, or told they weren't good enough. Working-class families who had been made to feel inferior by wealthy relatives, women who had been silenced by powerful in-laws, young people who had been judged by their backgrounds rather than their character. For them, Zara had done what they'd always wished they could do. She'd fought back. The Washington family tried to control the narrative, but it was too late. Details about the private investigator emerged. Guests began sharing stories about Vivien Washington's history of cruel behavior toward people she considered beneath her. The family that had spent decades building their reputation watched it crumble in real time. 3 days after the wedding, Malik filed for annulment. He claimed the marriage had been entered into under duress and that Zara's violent behavior had revealed her true character. But Zara had one more surprise for the Washington family. She hired the best defamation lawyer in Atlanta and sued Vivien Washington for publicly sharing private information obtained through illegal surveillance. The private investigator reports that had been used to humiliate her became evidence in a civil lawsuit. Within 6 months, Zara had won a settlement that covered her legal fees, and then some. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was what happened next. The community center where Zara worked saw a flood of donations from people who had been inspired by her story. Women's shelters reached out to offer her board positions. Speaking engagements poured in from organizations focused on empowerment and standing up to bullies. Malik, meanwhile, watched his life fall apart from the sidelines. The woman he'd claimed to love had fought for her dignity, while he sat frozen by fear of disappointing his family. His cowardice in that moment revealed everything about who he really was, and who he would always be. 6 months later, something unexpected happened. Malik reached out to Zara, begging for reconciliation. He claimed he'd realized his mistake, that he was willing to cut ties with his family if she would take him back. He said he finally understood what she'd been going through, and that he would spend the rest of his life making it up to her. Zara's response was swift and final. "The man I fell in love with would have stood up for me from the beginning. The man I married sat silent while his mother destroyed me in front of 200 people. You showed me who you really are, and I believe you." She had learned something powerful that day at the Swan House. Sometimes blood may be thicker than water, but dignity is stronger than both. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who will hurt you the most. And sometimes the only way to save yourself is to fight back, even when everyone tells you it's wrong. The question that lingered in everyone's mind wasn't whether Zara had been right to fight. It was why it had taken so long for someone to put the Washington family in their place. For years, they had used their money and status to look down on others, to make people feel small, to maintain their position by keeping others beneath them. Zara had simply refused to play that game. Today, Zara runs her own nonprofit organization focused on empowering young women from underserved communities. She speaks regularly about the importance of knowing your worth and refusing to let others define your value. The torn wedding dress from that infamous day hangs in her office, not as a reminder of failure, but as a symbol of the moment she chose herself over acceptance. The Washington family never recovered their social standing. Vivien Washington was quietly asked to step down from several board positions. Charles Washington faced professional consequences when details about his role in the private investigation became public. Simone and Trevor became cautionary tales about what happens when privilege meets reality. As for the broader community, the wedding that was supposed to be a celebration became something more important, a reckoning. It forced conversations about class, respect, and the toxic dynamics that can exist within families. It made people examine their own behavior and ask themselves, when have I made someone feel small? When have I used my position to hurt others? When have I stood by and watched injustice happen without speaking up? What would you have done in Zara's shoes? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace? Would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have fought back like she did? Comment your answer below. I'll be reading every single one. Because here's the thing about standing up to bullies. It's never really about that one moment. It's about all the moments that led up to it. All the times someone was made to feel less than. All the times dignity was traded for acceptance. All the times good people stayed quiet, while bad people won. Zara Johnson Washington, yes, she kept the name because she'd earned it, proved that sometimes fighting back is the only way forward. Sometimes causing a scene is the only way to be heard. Sometimes breaking things is the only way to rebuild them properly. And if you thought this story was wild, hit that subscribe button for more stories. But for now, remember this. Your dignity is not negotiable. Your worth is not determined by other people's opinions. And sometimes the most important fight of your life happens when you're wearing a wedding dress.